The papaya that remembered. The air in my grandfather's village doesn't move. It's not like the air in Phnom Penh, which is thick with moto exhaust and the smell of street food, always churning, always alive. Here, in the deep countryside of Kampong Spew, the air just hangs. In the midday heat, it settles over the rice paddies and the sugar palm trees like a heavy, wet blanket, trapping the drone of the cicadas and the weight of a silence that feels older than the houses themselves. I had come to visit my grandfather, because my mother was worried. He was getting old, she said, forgetting things, talking to himself. And that was how I first saw the tree. It stood alone at the edge of his property, where the manicured dirt yard gave way to unruly shrubs and the wild green beyond. It was a papaya tree, but it was wrong. All wrong. I've seen hundreds of papaya trees in my life, laden with green or sun-blushed fruit. This one was a perversion. Its trunk was pale and scarred, looking less like bark and more like sun-bleached bone. Its leaves were a sickly, jaundiced yellow, drooping in the oppressive heat as if they'd given up. But the fruit was the worst part. They were grotesquely swollen, unnaturally large, with a waxy, bruised yellow skin. They didn't hang with the promise of sweet, vibrant flesh. They drooped heavy and morbid like tumors growing from the trunk. And from the stem of each one, a single, thick bead of amber sap would well up and trickle down its side, slow as molasses. The sap was the color of old honey, but it smelled of something else entirely. Something sweet but rotten. The scent of overripe mangoes left in the sun for too long, mixed with the damp, loamy smell of soil after a heavy rain. It was a smell of decay trying to disguise itself as life. I remember turning to my grandfather, who was sitting on the wooden steps of his stilt house, staring at nothing. "Ta," I said, my city voice sounding loud and out of place here. "What's wrong with your papaya tree? Is it diseased?" He didn't look at me. His eyes, clouded with age, were fixed on the tree. His hands, gnarled and dark, rested on his knees, and I could see the knuckles were white. He just shook his head slowly, a barely perceptible motion. "It is not sick," he whispered, his voice raspy, dry as dust. "It is hungry." I laughed it off, of course. A joke. The kind of strange thing an old man says. I spent the rest of the afternoon helping him, sweeping the dirt yard, feeding the chickens. But no matter where I was on his small plot of land, I could feel that tree at the edge of my vision. I could smell that cloying, sickly sweet sap on the air. It was a constant, unsettling presence, a stain on the otherwise peaceful landscape. The heat didn't break that evening. It just grew dark and thick. As my grandfather prepared a small bowl of rice porridge for our dinner, I watched him from the doorway. He was a small man, made smaller by the years, his back permanently stooped. He moved with a quiet, deliberate slowness. But as he worked, his eyes kept flicking towards the window, towards the dark shape of the tree silhouetted against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. He was afraid of it. Genuinely, deeply afraid. And that night, for the first time, I started to wonder what he meant. What could a tree possibly be hungry for? The next day, the heat was even worse. A suffocating, wet heat that made your clothes stick to your skin, and the simple act of breathing feel like a chore. The cicadas buzzed with a frantic, desperate energy, their sound a constant, high-pitched drill in my ears. I was sitting in the sliver of shade under the house, trying to catch a non-existent breeze, when I saw my grandfather walk out into the yard. He was carrying his krama, the checkered scarf he always wore, and a long, curved knife, the kind used for harvesting coconuts. He walked with a strange, rigid determination, his eyes locked on the papaya tree. He wasn't shuffling like an old man anymore. He was marching, like a soldier heading into a battle he knew he would lose. "Ta, what are you doing?" I called out, getting to my feet. "It's too hot to be out in the sun." He ignored me. He reached the tree and stood before it, staring up at the swollen, jaundiced fruit. He looked so small next to it. He wiped his brow with the krama, his hand trembling slightly. He seemed to be muttering to himself, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Then, with a grunt of effort that seemed to tear through the still air, he reached up with the long knife and sliced one of the papayas from its stem. It fell to the earth with a wet, heavy thud. Not the crisp sound of falling fruit, but a soft, fleshy impact, like a piece of meat hitting the ground. The amber sap, now disturbed, flowed freely from the cut stem, thick and dark. My grandfather knelt, his joints cracking in protest, and picked up the fruit. He brought it back to the wooden steps and sat down heavily, the papaya resting in his lap. I approached him slowly. "Tom, maybe you should leave it. It doesn't look good." "We must know," he rasped, his eyes wide, holding a kind of frantic terror I had never seen in him before. "We must see what is inside." He placed the fruit on the wooden plank of the step and raised the knife. The blade slid through the soft skin with a sickeningly quiet ease. As he pulled the two halves apart, a new smell filled the air, instantly overpowering the scent of the sap. It was the smell of marigolds. Specifically, the smell of day-old marigolds left on a forgotten shrine, their fragrance turning dusty and funereal. I leaned closer and my stomach turned. The flesh inside was not the vibrant orange or sunset red of a healthy papaya. It was a mottled, bruised purple, the color of a fresh corpse. The black seeds inside were clustered together, looking like a swarm of dead flies. It was the most profane, unnatural thing I had ever seen come from the earth. My grandfather stared at it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His face, already weathered and wrinkled, seemed to hollow out, his skin pulling tight against his cheekbones. He looked ancient, horrified. With a trembling hand, he used the tip of his knife to cut a small, quivering piece of the purple flesh. "Ta, no," I said, reaching for him. "Don't eat that, it's rotten." He flinched away from my touch, his eyes never leaving the piece of fruit on his knife. "I have to," he whispered. It was a statement of grim finality. He brought the knife to his lips and slid the piece of papaya into his mouth. He chewed once, twice, and then his eyes rolled back in his head. A violent shudder racked his entire body. The relentless, monotonous drone of the cicadas outside seemed to warp and distort, the sound dissolving into a cacophony of desperate, echoing screams that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were screams of pain, of terror, of lives being extinguished in a flash of violence. My grandfather choked, his face contorting in agony. He spat the fruit out, but what landed on the wooden step was not a purple pulp. It was a thick, coppery mouthful of blood. He clutched the side of his own head, his knuckles white, his mouth open in a silent scream of his own. He was feeling something, remembering something. I saw it on his face. He felt the phantom impact of a rifle butt against his own cheekbone, a final, blinding flash of pain from a memory that was not his own. A memory that the earth itself, right under our feet, had refused to forget. He collapsed then, sliding off the step and onto the dirt, unconscious. The two halves of the grotesque papaya lay there beside him, weeping their foul-smelling sap, the purple flesh looking like an open wound in the heart of the world. And as I knelt beside my grandfather, trying to wake him, I knew this was no sickness of the mind. This was a sickness of the land. The tree wasn't just hungry, it was haunted. I managed to carry Ta inside and lay him on his thin mattress on the floor. His breathing was shallow and a fever was already taking hold. He muttered in his sleep fragmented words and names I didn't recognize, names that sounded like ghosts on his tongue. Vanna, Safib, the broken spectacles, a yellow shirt, nonsense phrases that felt terrifyingly specific. I couldn't just leave him. I couldn't call for help. The nearest clinic was an hour away by moto, and I didn't know if he could survive the journey. I was trapped in this small wooden house with a dying old man and a monstrous tree that fed on nightmares. That night was the longest of my life. I sat by my grandfather's side, wiping his brow with a cool, damp cloth. The house was filled with his delirious whispers and the incessant chirping of geckos on the walls. But underneath those familiar sounds, there was something else, a new sound coming from outside. It started as a faint scratching. I told myself it was just a dog or some other night animal digging for roots. But the sound was rhythmic, methodical. It was the sound of digging. A slow, steady scraping of dirt and stone coming from the direction of the papaya tree. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crept to the window, the one that looked out onto the yard, and peered through the wooden slats. The moon was a pale sliver, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. I could see the silhouette of the papaya tree, its misshapen fruit like heads hanging in the gallows, and at its base, the shadows seemed deeper, thicker. They seemed to be moving, churning, as if the darkness itself was alive and digging into the earth. I flinched back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my mind playing games on me in the darkness and the stress. I went back to my grandfather's side, but I couldn't shake the sound from my ears. Scratch, scrape, drag all night long. The smell came next. That sweet, rotten smell of the marigolds and damp soil began to seep into the house. It pushed its way through the cracks in the floorboards and the gaps in the window frames, a foul perfume that clung to the back of my throat and made my eyes water. It was the smell of a grave being opened. By morning, the digging sounds had stopped. My grandfather's fever had not broken. He was weaker, his skin pale and clammy. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and watch him fade away while that thing in the yard poisoned the very air we breathed. Steeling myself, I walked outside. The sun was already hot, the air already thick. I avoided looking at the tree, instead walking around the side of the house to the neighboring property, a small hut belonging to an old woman named Yi Esre. She had known my grandfather his entire life. If anyone knew what was happening, it would be her. She was sitting on her porch, weaving a basket from dried palm leaves, her fingers moving with an ancient, practiced grace. She saw me approaching and her work slowed, her dark eyes watching me with a mixture of pity and fear. "Your Ta," she said, her voice a low crackle. "He is not well." It wasn't a question. "Yi Esre," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "It's the tree, the papaya tree. There's something wrong with it." She stopped weaving altogether. She set the basket down and sighed, a long, weary sound. "That tree should have been cut down the day it sprouted," she said, not looking at me but past me at my grandfather's land. "It grows on bad soil, unblessed soil." "What do you mean, bad soil?" She finally looked at me, her eyes holding the weight of a history I could only read about in books. "During the dark times, Dara," she said softly, "your grandfather's land, it was at the edge of the village, a convenient place, quiet. Many people were brought here. They were told they were being re-educated. They were never seen again." A cold dread washed over me, colder than any fever. They're buried there. She nodded slowly. "No one knows exactly where. People do not like to look. The earth was turned over so many times, but some places remember. The sorrow seeps into the soil. It poisons the roots. That tree did not grow on water and sunlight, boy. It grew on pain. It grew on blood. Its fruit is not fruit. It is memory. And your grandfather, he was a boy then. He saw things. He was forced to dig. He has tried to forget for 40 years. But that tree, it will not let him." The digging sounds, the screams in the cicada song, the bruised purple flesh, it all clicked into place, a horrifying, perfect mosaic of terror. The tree was a monument to an atrocity, a living tombstone feeding on the anguish trapped in the ground beneath it. And by eating its fruit, my grandfather had consumed that anguish. He was reliving the final moments of the people buried there. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice desperate. "I have to help him." Yi Esre looked at the sky, then back at me. Her face was a mask of grim resignation. "You cannot fight a memory, Dara, especially one that has taken root in the earth. But the vessel can be destroyed. But be warned. The spirits tied to that place are not peaceful. They are ghosts of violence. They are angry. They will not want to be disturbed." I walked back to my Ta's house with her words echoing in my mind. The vessel can be destroyed. I looked at the tree, really looked at it, for the first time with understanding instead of just unease. It wasn't a plant anymore. It was a cancer, a living nexus of pain that was slowly killing my grandfather. I found the old axe my grandfather kept for chopping firewood. It was heavy, the wooden handle worn smooth from years of use, the blade rusted and dull. As I picked it up, I felt a change in the atmosphere. The drone of the cicadas stopped. A complete, unnatural silence fell over the yard. The air grew heavy and cold, the humidity turning clammy against my skin. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, watching me. I walked towards the tree, each step feeling like I was wading through deep water. The sickly sweet smell was overwhelming now, a physical presence that made me gag. As I got closer, I saw that the ground around the base of the tree was disturbed. Loose soil and small stones were scattered about, as if something had indeed been digging there all night. And lying in the dirt, half buried, was a small, round piece of glass. It was a lens from a pair of spectacles, the broken spectacles. My grandfather's delirious words came rushing back. A whisper slithered through the air, seeming to come from the yellowed leaves of the tree itself. It was a sibilant, mournful sound, the exhalation of 100 final breaths all at once. I felt a pressure against my chest, an unseen force pushing me back, warning me away. My survival instinct screamed at me to drop the axe, to run, to get in my moto and ride back to Phnom Penh and never look back. But then I thought of my Ta, lying on his mat, consumed by the ghosts of this place. My fear turned to anger, an anger at the injustice, at the pain that had been left to fester here in the soil for decades. I raised the axe. The moment the blade made contact with the pale, bone-like trunk, all hell broke loose. A scream tore through the air, not from a human throat, but from the tree itself. It was a high-pitched, agonizing shriek of splintering wood and tormented spirits. The air exploded with activity. I felt the touch of icy cold fingers on my arms, my neck, my face. Shadows darted at the edge of my vision, gaunt, skeletal figures in black peasant clothing, their faces hollowed out with despair. They weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They were more like afterimages of pain, flashes of suffering burned into the world. The sap that sprayed from the gash in the trunk was not amber. It was dark red, thick and viscous like old blood. It spattered my face and arms, and it smelled of rust and decay. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and swung again. And again. Each impact was met with that horrifying, supernatural shriek. The whispers around me turned to enraged cries, a chorus of tormented souls. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my side, as if from a bayonet. A phantom agony flared in my ankle, the ghost of a shackle. I was feeling their deaths, their last moments of terror and pain, the tree channeling it all directly into me. I was sobbing, my tears mixing with the bloody sap on my face, but I didn't stop swinging. I was fighting for my grandfather. I was fighting for my own sanity. The trunk was weak, rotted from the inside by its unnatural diet. With one final, desperate swing, there was a loud crack like a breaking bone, and the tree began to topple. It fell in slow motion, groaning as it went, its grotesque fruit smashing against the ground with wet, fleshy sounds. As its roots were torn from the earth, the ground beneath it crumbled. The dirt gave way, collapsing in on itself, revealing a dark, gaping hole, a shallow, unmarked mass grave. The moment the tree hit the ground, a wave of psychic energy slammed into me, knocking me off my feet. I landed hard on my back, the axe flying from my grasp. An image, a memory, exploded in my mind, as clear as if I were living it. I am not Dara anymore. I'm a young man in a yellowed shirt, my hands tied behind my back. My spectacles are broken, knocked from my face. I am kneeling. The midday sun is hot on my neck. The cicadas are screaming. I smell the cloying sweetness of marigolds from a garland crushed under a soldier's boot. I hear a cold, detached voice give an order. I feel the hard, round press of a rifle barrel against the back of my head. There is a final, blinding flash of white-hot pain, and then nothing. Just the deep, silent, welcoming darkness of the earth. I came back to myself with a gasp, choking on the dirt in my mouth. I was lying on the edge of the pit, my body shaking uncontrollably. The air was still cold, but the whispers, the screams, they were gone. There was only silence, the oppressive, heavy silence of a place where too much has happened. I stumbled back to the house. My grandfather was sitting up on his mattress. The fever was gone. His eyes were lucid, clear for the first time since I'd arrived. He looked at me, at the blood-like sap covering my clothes, at the horror on my face. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. He just looked out the window, at the fallen tree and the open grave, and a single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He looked hollowed out, as if the part of him that had been tethered to that horror was finally gone, but it had taken a piece of his soul with it. The next few days were quiet. We called the monks from the local wat. They came and chanted, their calm, serene voices a balm on the wounded air. They performed the rites for the unremembered dead, helping the restless souls finally find their way. We filled the hole in the earth, creating a simple, unmarked mound. A quiet monument to a pain that should never be forgotten, but could no longer be allowed to fester. My grandfather started to eat again. He didn't speak much, but the frantic terror in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. I knew it was time for me to return to Phnom Penh. On the day I was leaving, I stood at the edge of the property one last time, looking at the fresh mound of dirt. The silence was normal now, filled with the gentle buzz of insects and the distant laughter of children. The air, for the first time, felt like it was moving again. It felt clean. But as I turned to go, my eyes caught something, a flicker of green against the dark brown soil of the mound. I took a step closer, my heart freezing in my chest. Pushing its way up through the disturbed earth, no bigger than my thumb, was a tiny, vibrant green sprout. It had two small, perfectly formed leaves. It was a new papaya shoot. The land, you see, does not forget. The sorrow seeps deep into the soil. It can lie dormant, but it is always there, waiting for new roots to drink it in, waiting to bear its terrible fruit once more. So I warn you, if you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, a place where the air is too still and the silence is too loud, be careful where you walk. Be careful of the trees that grow there. Some things are better left buried, and some memories are so terrible, not even the earth itself can digest them. It can only bring them back to the surface again and again and again.